It is a very great honor for me to introduce former First Lady Laura Bush on behalf of the Dialogue Institute of the Southwest in many, many, many ways. We are honoring her tonight for her contributions in education, which are the key to fostering both positive dialogue and positive social relations among different religions and cultures. I'm going to highlight those contributions to education very briefly, but I do not want to forget the important role she plays as the chair of the Women's Initiative at the George W. Bush Institute. I visited there about 3 years ago and visited with your assistant, Charity Wallace, about some of those initiatives. If you don't know about them, hit the website, look, fascinating stuff. Global healthcare innovation, empowering women in emerging democracies, and continuing the support that she and her husband, President George Bush, have offered the men and women who served in the American military. Now, education. Laura Bush holds a bachelor's degree in education from SMU, Ponies, and a master's degree in library science from UT, Hook 'em Horns, both my schools. She was for many years a public school teacher in Dallas, Houston, and Austin, and knows it from the ground up. SMU is proud that she now serves on the Board of Trustees, where she extends her lifelong engagement and interest in teaching to the present students of her alma mater. And that interest in education has particularly been focused on reading. Like my mother, if I can take a moment of personal privilege, Ms. Bush fulfilled her career in education as a librarian and helping raise new generations to the joy of reading. Going further, she's the founder of both the Texas Book Festival and the National Book Festival in Washington, D.C. Those of us who have heard her speak, and I still remember the commencement address several years ago at SMU and the Barley House, have seen her work. And now we look forward to a challenging and engaging address that will no doubt inspire us to contribute to the rich, multicultural, and religiously diverse society in which we live. Mrs. Bush, on behalf of the Dialogue Institute of the Southwest, I welcome you to the stage and to the podium. Thank you.
This is your name, and it's a
beautiful
plate. And,
thank you
very
so
much. We'll hold it for you.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, great, thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here with you tonight. And thank you especially to Ali Riza. Thank you very much for your inviting me, and thank you for this honor that you just awarded me. I'm so happy to join the dialogue of the Institute of Southwest for this evening. Congratulations to Dr. Perkul, who we just heard from. Thank you very much, and thanks to Dr. Hunt for the very nice introduction, and thank you for the work that you do at SMU Perkins School of Theology. Thanks to everyone for the warm welcome and for your support for the Dialogue Institute of the Southwest. Thanks to Dr. Collier for telling us about Gulen and his beliefs, and the two quotes that you gave us I thought are so important: to seek happiness in the happiness of others, and then the wonderful idea of having a seat for everyone in your heart. I think that's really wonderful. And I know that many of you gathered here tonight have expanded Gulen's philosophy and principles all over the world, even to right here in Texas. So thank you all for that. You might come from different backgrounds, but you came together to build schools, to participate in diversity seminars, to share meals with young people of varying faiths, and to provide financial support for those in need. As Gulen said, you have found a seat for everyone in your heart. And for that, I'm grateful. I thought before I get started, you might want to report on some of my family members. My father and mother-in-law, President George H.W. Bush and Barbara, are doing very well. Last June, President Bush celebrated his 90th birthday by once again jumping out of an airplane. This June, my mother-in-law, Barbara Bush, will celebrate her 90th birthday. In fact, George and I and our girls and our baby, Mila, are all going to Maine for her 90th birthday. And she'll celebrate with a 2-day celebration benefiting her foundation, the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. And this gives me a chance to remind you of her foundation. Her foundation gives grants to family literacy projects, and those are projects that both teach literacy to children, but make sure that their caregivers or their family members are literate as well. So if any of you have great foundations or programs that do that, don't forget the Barbara Bush Foundation to apply to for a grant. President Bush and Barr, as we call her, are both happy and in good spirits. And George and I believe that they're showing us the way to age with grace. In Maine, in the summers, my mother-in-law, Barbara, walks her dogs on the beach every day. Last summer, she walked with a walker. From both of them, George and I have learned that all we know we have is now. So take advantage of your life as it is and walk on the beach every chance you get. And this gives me a chance to thank every one of you for using your now to bring people together with the idea of peace and friendship. So thank you all. I'm grateful. My George has been working on his golf game and his painting. Did you know that he's become an artist in retirement? He's written a new book about his dad, 41, A Portrait of My Father. It's a lovely tribute to a great man, and I encourage you all to purchase a copy. In fact, Father's Day is coming up on June 21st, and that's a perfect day to give George's book to your dad. George and I are both devoting a lot of time to our work at the Bush Presidential Center right here on the campus of SMU, and I invite you all to visit us there and visit the Bush Library and Museum and eat at Cafe 43. It's a very nice place to have lunch. As part of the Bush Center, we've established the Bush Institute, a public policy institute that addresses the policy areas that were the most important to us when George was president. And as you might guess, there's an overriding theme of freedom. Freedom from ignorance, our education initiative. Freedom from disease, our global health initiative. Promoting free enterprise, our economic initiative. And we're supporting dissidents and political prisoners and democracy building around the world through our Human Freedom Initiative. George has a special program to support the men and women of the United States military. In fact, just weekend before last, we hosted wounded warriors at our ranch for the annual Warrior 100, W100, a mountain bike ride for our wounded warriors. And then this fall, George will host, I think, the 5th annual golf tournament here at Las Colinas for wounded warriors. And then we're doing a lot of research on the best ways we can support our returning veterans. We're doing research with Syracuse University that shows there's sort of a disconnect between civilian vocabulary and the vocabulary of veterans. So we're trying to help our veterans understand that, so when they apply for jobs, when they return or get out of the military, that they'll have a better chance of being able to get the kind of jobs that they want. And then I'm chairing the Women's Initiative at the Bush Institute. I was telling Ali earlier that one of the things we've done, we've had 4 classes, 4 years of mentorship with 2 classes of Egyptian women and 2 of Tunisian women, with the idea that if you bring women all from the same country for a fellowship, when they go home, they have each other. And then they can introduce each other to their colleagues and their friends and broaden their network across their country. So these fellowships began with a month long here in the United States. They study leadership classes at SMU, including how to negotiate without authority, which is what, of course, a lot of women worldwide have to know to do. And then they are paired with a prominent American woman who's in their own field. So then they go off to the town of their mentor. And then they visit civil institutions in the United States, the sort of institutions that support our democracy, that women in emerging democracies are learning how to build. And those have been really terrific. But of course, the biggest event we've celebrated is the birth of our first grandchild, our granddaughter Mila. She's perfect. And our daughter Jenna and our son-in-law Henry are thrilled, although they have to be careful of being trampled by George and me in our rush to get our hands on the baby. Everyone has been asking us what our grandparent names are. Have you noticed that now grandparents are choosing special names for themselves? Maybe grandpa and grandma have gone out of fashion in a pretense that we're not really old enough to be grandparents. When I had Barbara and Jenna, my dad said, they can just call me their old pa, and that's what they did. But now, it's sort of like choosing a name for your cat. Barbara and Jenna recently emailed that for no apparent reason, and I'm not kidding, they think my grandparent name should be Mimi Maxwell. George just wants the baby to call him Sir. Jenna and Henry Hager are enjoying life with their new baby, and they're excited about Mila's baby Sissy, who's due in August. Jenna's working as a contributing correspondent for NBC's Today Show. You may have seen her. George says she's just continuing the Bush family tradition of warm relations with the media. Our daughter Barbara has founded a nonprofit called Global Health Corps that places recent college graduates in the health field in underserved areas. Her Global Health Corps fellows are at work in 3 cities in the United States, including on the Global Health Desk at the State Department, and in 5 countries in Africa. You can learn more about Global Health Corps if you're interested, or if you know a young person who might be interested in becoming a fellow, by looking on the web at ghcorps.org. George and I are proud of the work our girls are doing. George is busy with the public policy programming at the Bush Institute, and as for me, it's come to this. This is the Laura Bush bobblehead doll. I got this from a friend of mine who found it in the gift shop at the Constitutional Center in Philadelphia a few weeks after President Obama's election. It was on the clearance shelf. He said he couldn't resist sending it to me. I told him he could have tried a little harder. But I'm kind of glad I have it. When you live in the White House, when you're a bobblehead inside a bubble, reality can get a little warped. Sometimes you have to work hard just to recognize yourself. During those 8 years, I tried to make it a general policy not to read the absurd news items about our family, but sometimes it was just too much fun. I'd like to report that now that we've left the White House and moved into our new home in Dallas, our lives are back to normal. But I think I may have forgotten what normal is. When you're married to the President of the United States, you don't worry too much about him leaving his wet towels on the floor. But in Dallas, things are different. Memo to the ex-president. Turmoil in East Timor is no longer an excuse not to pick up your socks. But what I'd like to talk about tonight is not our new lives out of the public eye, but I thought you might want to hear just a few reflections on our years at the White House. When we moved to Washington, we moved into a house we already knew very well. As you may recall, George's dad was president in 1988, and so for 4 years, the White House had been the home of my in-laws. And I knew from the example my mother-in-law had set as First Lady that it really is a home, a place where an awesome looming history could exist side by side with the chaos of normal family life. As familiar as the White House was to us, nothing could have prepared us for the momentous responsibility of taking up official residence there. I have to admit, though, that on that very first night in the White House, after 9 inaugural balls, the sharpest sensation I experienced came from my feet. With my shoes finally off, when I was lying in bed next to my husband, I found myself strangely at peace. not because I had any illusions that the next 4 years would be a smooth ride, but because my girls and my mother and George's parents and siblings and all of their children, 27 of us in all, were in the house together. How often does it happen in life that almost everyone you love is safe, under one roof, tucked into bed and accounted for? As the months passed, that night of perfect peace and security would become an ever more poignant marker of another time, another reality. When George was elected president, we believed that the challenges facing the country from within were going to be more urgent than those from without. The Cold War was over. The Berlin Wall had fallen and Germany was reunited. Russia was no longer our enemy, and peace was on its way to the Balkans and to Northern Ireland. And though there were serious and persistent problems, like achieving peace between Israel and Palestine, global terrorism had yet to emerge as a threat to our national survival. George's focus was on the issues he had stressed during his campaign: education reform, tax cuts, and Medicare and prescription drugs. My first job was to find my identity as First Lady. Not as easy a task as you might think, since everyone seemed eager just to assign me the personality of a previous First Lady. Who do you want to be? Reporters kept asking. Hillary Clinton or Barbara Bush? My answer was always the same. I think I'll just be Laura Bush. I knew Laura Bush pretty well, having grown up as her in Midland, Texas. But there always seemed to be people who claimed to know me better. One identity that was assigned to me was that of a stereotypical 1950s housewife, someone who was comfortable being pleasant and dutiful and keeping her opinions to herself. This is, I suppose, the kind of caricature that takes shape when you're a person who doesn't think it necessary to say everything you feel or tell everything you know. But I did have a few opinions I was very happy to share. I believe that every child in America should learn to read. I believe that literacy is an essential foundation for democracy. And from my own experience as a reader and librarian, I know that books have the power not just to move people as individuals, but to shape our journey as a nation. Look at Uncle Tom's Cabin. Abraham Lincoln once greeted Harriet Beecher Stowe by saying, "So this is the little lady who made the big war." Look at To Kill a Mockingbird, a novel that's enshrined for generations an ideal of American decency and conduct, and whose author, Harper Lee, President Bush and I were honored to receive at the White House. For me, reading is not just a cause I selected as First Lady. It's one of the guiding passions of my life. So I was especially excited on Saturday, September 8th, 2001. That was the day of the first National Book Festival, an event modeled on the highly successful Texas Book Festival that I'd helped start several years earlier when George was governor. It was a thrill for me to bring writers and readers together that Saturday to the mall in Washington, D.C., in front of one of the most beautiful and meaningful buildings in our capital, the Library of Congress. 30,000 people turned out, wandering from tent to tent on the open mall, listening to readings by their favorite authors, and buying books. Looking back, that was probably the last weekend when people could participate in a gathering like that without every now and then nervously glancing over their shoulders or up into the sky. On Tuesday morning, I was looking forward to another of the goals I'd set for myself. I was on my way to Capitol Hill from the White House to brief a Senate committee on early childhood education. Just as I was getting into the car, a Secret Service agent leaned over to me and said, "A plane has just hit the World Trade Center." We couldn't imagine the events that would transpire in the coming hour, so I continued with my plans to go to the Capitol. I joined Senator Ted Kennedy in his office as the unimaginable news developed. I remember sitting in that office, watching the towers fall on television and trying to process what I was seeing as Senator Kennedy, who'd absorbed so many shocks in his own life, kept up a steady stream of small talk. I think he must have been trying to reassure me somehow, but there was no reassuring anybody that day. That night, I was taken to a secure location deep below the White House. It was a Spartan place that looks like it was furnished sometime during the Truman years. It was here that I saw my husband for the first time since this horrible day had begun. I don't remember what we said. I remember that we hugged each other. We were safe. Our daughters were safe. But all we could think about were the thousands of Americans who couldn't say the same about their own loved ones, and about the duty that had suddenly fallen on George to lead the country through the dark shadow that had fallen over us. We slept that night in our bedroom in the White House, though it was a long time before sleep finally came. And in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps and rapid breathing in the hallway outside, and then a Secret Service agent running into the bedroom calling out, "Mr. President, you've got to go downstairs." Another plane, he said, was headed toward the White House. I didn't even have time to put on my contacts, so George held my hand as I blindly made my way back down to the bunker in my fuzzy bedroom slippers. But we weren't there long. An aide was unfolding the hide-a-bed when word came that the plane was one of ours. We went back upstairs to bed again, and like all of America, we woke up on September 12th to a different life. The events of that fateful September morning added gravity and consequence to the topics and issues I'd chosen to pursue while George was president. As First Lady, I was no longer just speaking out about literacy. I was giving a radio address denouncing the brutal treatment of women and children by the Taliban. I was no longer just organizing book festivals. I was visiting with a class of courageous women police officers in Afghanistan's Bamiyan province, the same province where the Taliban had shocked the world by destroying those two towering 6th century Buddhas. And even as I found my way as First Lady, advocating for global literacy and health, traveling to schools and visiting with America's young people, I was also a wife. I was with my husband on the days in which he had to make the sort of decisions that every president dreads. I'd originally fallen in love with George in large part because of his sense of humor and his quick wit. I'd wanted to marry someone who could make me laugh. But there were days when there was no laughing and no wisecracks, when I looked at his face and saw the gravity of the choices he had to make, when I saw the tears in his eyes after visiting the parents and the spouses of the men and women who'd been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not everyone had the opportunity to see this side of George W. Bush. For many, he remained the heedless cowboy caricature featured in editorial cartoons, op-eds, and late-night comedy shows. And one of the questions I most often ask is, how did you stand it? Didn't it bother you? Didn't it make your blood boil to read and watch this constant flood of criticism and invective? And of course, it bothered me, just as it would bother anyone in this room. It bothered me, but it didn't get to me, and there are several reasons why. For one thing, I know who I am, and I know who George is. For another, this is America, and America hangs on the proposition that what those of us in the White House sometimes perceive as a chorus of complaint, all that blathering and bloviating, is in reality a kind of sacred music, or at least the clanking gears of democracy. It's the freedom of speech, the principle that drives the Dialogue Institute of the Southwest. When you live in the White House, you live not just with the ghost of presidents, but with the echoes of citizens holding its government to account. Living there certainly does not make you infallible, but it consistently brings you comfort. Unpopular decisions are made in rooms where other presidents wrestled with their Congresses and their consciences, where their critics denounced them as despots or political hacks. Yet you have the feeling, walking through those rooms, that they were mostly decent men who tried to do the very best they could with the breathtaking responsibility that had been entrusted to them. I never felt this sense of continuity more strongly than on the morning that George and I left the White House to make way for President and Mrs. Obama. It was a bittersweet day, of course. There were so many White House staffers to say goodbyes to, so many good friends with whom we had shared so much during the last 8 years. But as the new president and his wife walked us to Marine One after the inauguration, we felt not sadness, but a solemn pride. As George had said many times, we're the big ship, America. We may lean to the left or to the right, but we stay on course. Inside the helicopter waiting for us were my mother and father-in-law. This flight reminded me of a flight I made in 1988 when George and I were moving back to Texas after living in Washington for a year and a half, working on President Bush's campaign. I remembered how on that trip I had looked down at the Capitol, the monuments shining in the brilliant winter light, thinking how fortunate and privileged I had been to witness a slice of history firsthand. It would never have occurred to me on that trip in 1988 that 20 years later I would be in Marine One with my husband as he was taking leave of the highest office in the land, sitting next to Gampy and Barr, who had made this same journey following their tenure at the White House, once again leaving D.C. and heading back to Texas. So, after many adventures, we're back home in Texas, living what I call the afterlife in a state George calls the Promised Land. And as I reflect in this afterlife, looking back on the humbling and heady experience of being First Lady at a time when the stakes for my country were so high, one memory keeps surfacing. It's Tuesday, October 30th, 2001, less than 2 months after the terrorist attacks. I'm in Yankee Stadium, about to watch my husband throw the first pitch in the first game of the World Series in New York between the Yankees and the Diamondbacks. In any other time, this would be the most lighthearted of presidential duties. But now, every landmark is a potential terrorist objective, every crowd a target. The police officers and firefighters and other first responders who are guarding the president are still grieving their dead. There are 57,000 people in the crowd. George is under the stadium warming up and talking to Derek Jeter. "Are you going to throw from the mound?" Jeter asks. "What do you think?" George says. "Be a man, throw from the mound." But then as Jeter walks away, he calls out, "Don't bounce it, they'll boo you." George is now worried about bouncing the pitch. But I'm still worried about something else. And then he walks out to the pitcher's mound, the only person in the infield, the President of the United States standing all alone in a crowd at a time when our country is at its most fearful and vulnerable, when an attack from any direction can come at any moment. All I can do is hold my breath and remind myself that this is the job of the president. But you know what I found out? It's not only the president's job. It's the job of any American, Republican, Democrat, or Independent, who has an urge to take a stand and make a difference, and who's willing to step up to his or her own pitcher's mound, to face failure, humiliation, or even mortal danger. The greatest honor of being First Lady was having the chance to witness every now and then, not just my husband, but all of America, facing up to fear and shattering change and standing proud. By the way, through a strike. At least that's what he told me. Thank you all very much, and may God bless you, and may God bless your dialogue. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you very much, and thank you for this honor. Appreciate you very much. Thank you for your wonderful work to bring people together. Appreciate you. Okay, you all ready? Good night, everybody. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
Now the First Lady is gone, we can start dancing, right? Well, we will continue the program very briefly with the music performance from Aşk-ı Meşk group. In the meantime, as I mentioned, our silent auction is still going on. So we are about to start yelling and screaming and selling those stuff. So if you haven't purchased anything, just walk out to your left and start bidding because they will be gone soon. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. We definitely enjoy your company. Have a great rest of the night, and God bless you all. Thank you.